Okay, we are good to go.
Thanks, Trent. All right, everyone, it is 7:02 p.m. On September 22nd, and I'll call this meeting of the Board of Education to order, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now you get to sing.
Okay. So our first item on our agenda is our report from our student Board of Education representatives. So I'll hand it over to Joe and Megan.
Okay, thank you very much again for having us today. It is great to be here. I will get us started with our events, and me and Megan will split the rest back and forth from there. The first thing we have on our list was that, of course, distance learning at Old Saybrook High School is continuing. It's continuing with the plan. We discussed the effectiveness of the hybrid plan in the Superintendent's Principals Advisory Council. We decided that it's been wildly successful so far. The feedback was that students felt like they were very safe and that they were able to accomplish quite a bit, both in the room and online, despite the technological limitations that we've been experiencing, and a lot of those have been starting to be worked out. Teachers have improved greatly at integrating those students online on either Monday, Tuesday, all on Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday into the classroom, especially when there are students in the classroom that need to be kept track of as well. It's created a much comprehensive synchronous learning experience. And I definitely think that we've made quite a bit of progress getting better at that in the past couple of weeks.
All right, to move on, the next thing we have is Distance Wednesdays. So this week, or the past week, was the first week that everyone was online on Wednesdays. This was definitely very successful. All students were at home. Most teachers held class like usual. Some teachers tailored lessons to be more compatible for the online platform, and some teachers decided to have that be more independent work day where you'd sign on, but then it wasn't as much lesson teaching, but more independent work. But it was just, kids were already used to having to log on their days that they weren't in school. So it was really successful.
The next thing we have is that a lot of Old Saybrook High School students that were here in any year in the past are getting used to the new lunch system. There are 3 new lunch waves at the high school. Right now, these lunch waves are pretty small because there are 3 of them. You're getting approximately 1/3 of 1/2 of the Old Saybrook High School population for each lunch wave. But students are able to sit in the cafeteria, outside the cafeteria, under a tent that's been set up, or in the courtyard. The system has been working pretty well, and there's tape to block off certain seats. All of the students are facing the same direction to make sure that there's less spread of aerosols in the area. Generally, it's been pretty successful. Lunch waves are about 20-25 minutes, and it all depends on what the student's third period class is, which lunch period they attend. But overall, it's been a pretty successful plan, and definitely been much safer than would have happened if there was still an X block or some sort of different lunch plan.
All right, and to move on to sports, so full contact and full team sports practices started this Monday, the 21st. The game schedules have also been released, and the games are planning on starting on October 1st. Currently, there's no plan for transportation yet for the games, but what we know, everything with full team, full contact has been successful so far. We still social distance when we arrive and exit practice, wear masks when we're within 6 feet and we're not playing on the field. But thus far, everything's gone smoothly.
One thing that has also been going on that we thought was worth notice was that the guidance staff has been making themselves a resource to get seniors ready for college applications, as that application process is getting started. Most early applications will be due early November, and the rest of the applications will be due early January. So we're getting a head start on that. all the guidance staff virtually visited many of the English classes to walk seniors through connecting their Naviance account with their Common App account, finishing up a few vital things on the Common App that need some guidance help. And ultimately, it's been very successful in making seniors feel like they've gotten a little bit more of a head start and that they're ready to continue with the process on their own.
All right, and then next we have clubs. So clubs started this Monday, the 21st. These were done both virtually and in the classroom. So you could log on via Google Meet to join, or if you're in school based on your cohort, you could go to the classroom in which the club was being held in. But also a nice new thing about this is if you're somebody who can't stay after school because you don't have a ride or something, you are able to now leave school and still join. Even if you're at school, you can still join via the Google Meet. So I think that this is a good new way to get clubs rolling, because now you can have people, especially the underclassmen who don't drive to school, may not necessarily have a ride, now they will be able to join the clubs without necessarily being physically present. So these started on Monday, and obviously the events are not necessarily going to be the same. Everything's going to be a little bit different, but I know like the Ecology Club does a cleanup, does lots of different cleanups, and their first cleanup is on Saturday. So that's something that can still be done socially distanced as they clean up the beach. So that's good that we're still able to do some events, but everything's been running smoothly with that. And we're finding new ways to allow more students to participate in these clubs through the online platforms.
And our last thing is that Drama Club has started, as opposed to the typical fall play, which we've been used to for however many years that's been going on. We are meeting virtually through Google Meet from 7 to 8 p.m. on Mondays and Wednesdays, where we are writing our own monologues about some theater-related experience. And these monologues will be performed virtually once they are finished. Right now, we're getting feedback from our peers who are attending the meetings and Lenore Grunko, our director. It's been pretty successful so far. It's a fun experience, and it's pretty casual. Not everybody has to show up for every meeting. It's more just to stay immersed in the theater experience a little bit more, considering it's difficult to put on some big production right now. So Megan and I are happy to take any questions at all, and anything we could clarify, we'd be happy to.
This is Eileen Baker. Such a great report. I have a question regarding the desk shields. Do you find that you're carrying them around to different classes? As I know at the last meeting, I think Sheila Riffle had said that she didn't want it to be cumbersome. So I'm just curious to know from your perspective, are you wearing masks at school? And
so as for now, we have not started using the desk shields. Right now we're in like the trial stage, as the 3 language classrooms have them set up. And then, so as the classes go in, they get sanitized every period, and different students are using them. But I know that Joe was supposed to be carrying one around for a day to do like a trial run of what it would be like to have students carrying them. I don't know, Joe, have you done that yet or not yet?
Yeah, I don't really know what happened to that plan. I volunteer for that, but I think that trying them out in the language department was favored over that plan. I'm not really, maybe that'll be the next step. I'm not sure. I was never reached out to about that. So hopefully that's something that we develop in this next week, if those shields are something that we decide to move forward with.
so when you go into your classes, how many are normally in the class with you?
So student-wise or desk shield-wise?
Oh, probably student-wise, because the desk shields with the students.
Yeah, so the language class that I take a Spanish class, and I think there's about 8 kids in it. So then each kid has their own desk shield.
But you're saying that those are sanitized then when you leave, because the next cohort has to use them.
Yeah, they get sanitized for the next period, because then the next class comes in and uses them. But I think the hope is that eventually each student will have their own to walk around with and can bring to each class, so that we're not sanitizing them all the time, that it's just like your own personal one.
So Jan, is that something that the district is looking to purchase more desk shields?
We already have enough for everyone.
Oh, okay. Just a matter
I
of
think
taking them with
the
you.
high school is just struggling with how to get students to carry them around. They're not small, they're big and bulky. And other schools in our district, in the middle school and the elementary school, students stay in one place. They have one desk that belongs to them. And that's not true at the high school. But I know that that's something that they're working on. And Joe, I do think that the expectation of having it piloted, students carrying them around, that is going to happen as far as I know.
Will that be mandatory? Or will it be an optional thing that students can choose to have their own personal shield if they want?
I think that
or will they be required?
If we get to the point where that is part of our mitigation plan and it is written into our mitigation activities, especially when we go to full in person, I think that it might end up being required at the high school. I think we'll know more after this pilot. Let's see how the students do with it. You know, if it becomes something that you're dropping them on the floor and it's becoming more of a problem and creating more problems, then we might rethink it. But we did purchase enough for everyone with the intent that students would use them as an extra barrier between themselves and others in the room.
And so, Jan, right now, I think one of the student reps was explaining, and I hadn't realized it, that when he or she leaves the room, another class comes in, then those have to be sanitized. That's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, which is why that's not really something that we can maintain if we're going to give them out to students all over the high school. We wouldn't.
That's why if you give them out, then they have their own, and you don't have to worry about sanitizing.
So other questions for the student reps about their report?
Yes, hi, Cindy. Hi, Megan. Hi, Joe. I'm just curious as to how the kids are handling. I mean, you guys are normally so social and, congregating together and talking and finding ways to, check in with each other. I'm just curious as to how that's being handled, or is there support amongst, the seniors kind of helping other people out? What have you seen and how are people handling if they're getting too close?
I'm happy to start, and Megan, I'm sure, can add on from her own experiences. I think that the seniors definitely have been pretty helpful leaders when it comes to that. I mean, we're still getting used to it too, but we want to make sure that the underclassmen who are coming in, making sure they're following the rules too, to keep everyone safe, to keep everyone in school and just as healthy as possible. I think that generally lunch is a good experience right now because we are able to take that mask break during lunch. We are able to sit 6 feet apart and eat and talk to, somebody who's maybe close to us, but still at that 6 feet margin. It's not the same because we don't get to choose our lunch wave, but generally that is a little bit of an outlet for people to be more social. I think the teachers and the administrators have to be clear that that 6 feet is meant to be maintained within the classroom, and as much of that space should be maintained within the hallway as well. I think that as the expectations are definitely there. So there's not really too much wiggle room when it comes to, students meeting in places and talking really close to each other. That's definitely something that's been pretty closely regulated. So everyone's been keeping relatively safe. And I think that certainly, the upperclassmen are there to be leaders for the underclassmen, and I think they've taken up that role pretty amicably.
Thank you, Joe.
Other questions for our student reps?
This is George. I have a quick question.
Go ahead, George.
So, unless Jan presents something differently in a little bit, the school is going to go to full open in a couple of weeks. It's less than 2 weeks now. Essentially, how do students feel about that? Because you guys are getting used to this routine with the distancing and so on, all of a sudden there'll be twice as many students there all the time and every day and so on. Any thoughts on that? Or any feedback on that?
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit. So I am personally looking forward to October 5th in hopes that we'll go full time. I think that the classrooms are currently set up to have full capacity of students, and right now it's only half, but I feel that the classrooms definitely are as spaced out as they can be, and we have one-way hallways. There's tape everywhere and markers everywhere telling kids what to do. So I think that we prepared really well to have full capacity. I think that it definitely will be different because it will be double the amount of students that we've been used to for the past month. But I think that the school has done a lot in place in order to ensure that we will be able to maintain the guidelines and everything we've been following with the full capacity. And I also think that students are just really looking forward to having everyone there if that's possible. I think that overall the students and the culture is been really well because everybody wants to be in school is the impression that I'm getting. So people are wanting to follow the rules and the guidelines and do everything they can to allow that to be possible. So I think that kids are going to continue to do that in order to do the best we can to stay in school as long as we can.
Thank you.
Other questions for our student reps?
If I could just add, there were so many dire predictions about not being able to get students to wear masks in school. We heard that repeatedly from critics of opening schools, and it has not been the case in Old Saybrook. Students have been terrific, and I think that Megan really touched upon why that's true. They know that increasingly we're being told that this is the key to success. It's probably one of the only controls we have that is consistently proven to work. And on that point, I think it's really important to say, because I know members of the public are watching us right now, and our students are hearing us, on the Department of Public Health call that I was on this morning, they confirmed that there have been no communication of COVID in a school setting. So we have had cases of COVID, but those were brought in by individuals from outside and they got them someplace else. And if you noticed, fortunately, and I'm not bragging, hubris, but I think that we've not had any schools shut down because of mass cases of COVID. It's always been one or two. And those were all stories of people getting them playing on a travel team, being involved in some other events, or an adult bringing it in. So I think there's a success story here in the last few weeks that our schools across the state have been able to be so successful. That may not be the way it's told on the news because it's not exactly newsworthy, but the truth is it's working. I don't know that it will continue to work. Of course, we have to keep our eyes open, but I'm excited about what that could possibly mean. So thanks, Megan and Joe, for being part of the team that's doing what you need to do.
Thank you.
Of the student body, that's really helpful, and that's one of the valuable opportunities to have you as our representatives to the Board of Education.
Thanks. Other questions for our board reps before we move on? Great. Well, thank you, Megan and Joe. Excellent report, as always. Let's see. So moving on, any correspondence, Karen?
As you mentioned earlier, Terry, yes, we did have an email from a parent. It was addressed to the full board asking a question about our virtual meetings. When will we resume in-person meetings, and how can the public join the meeting? So, and I know you responded to her.
Right. Yeah. So for anyone who didn't have an opportunity to see that email, I did respond on behalf of the board to the person asking the question and let them know that for the foreseeable future, immediate future, the board's meetings will continue online. We've got a meeting scheduled on the 6th. That's a special meeting, and a meeting on the 13th. Both of those meetings will be online, and that we plan on communicating out both on our website and going forward on our agendas how to, send emails to the board or send letters to the board that the board will encourage the public to send us messages for questions or comments or concerns. And we will handle those as we do, like Karen just did, as correspondence going forward. And those will be posted on our board notebook, just like it would have been passed around like the clipboard when we were in person for the board to review it. And Karen will, recap that correspondence during our meetings. So it was a good question from the public, and I hope to make sure that we get out a message that's clear going forward for everybody. Thank you, Karen. Next up on the agenda is I'd like someone to make a motion in regards to approving our regular meeting minutes from September 8th.
So moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
Second, Jan.
Seconded by Jan. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. That brings us to the Old Saybrook Public Schools reopening update. And I just want to say before I hand this over to Jan, I know the board members and, obviously the public as well, is going to have a lot of questions about our reopening plan, about the changes and how things are going. And so, going forward, I'm happy to keep a standing agenda item on for the board members to ask questions. If you've got questions about how things are going, this would be the appropriate time to ask those kind of questions. And then I would ask the board if we can please try to stick to our agenda item topics as they come up. And if you end up having other questions about reopening or about how things are going, to table those questions either to ask at a future meeting or to, reach out to Jan or myself, after the meeting with your questions. So with that, I will hand it over to Jan for an update.
Thank you. I just want to clarify on the last vote, I think we had one abstention. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Jan. Appreciate that. I saw you letting Tim Trent know. Yes, abstention. Yes, I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I just want to make sure we
Thanks, Alan.
recorded it accurately. So thank you, Chairwoman Barros. We, as you know, a little bit of brief history, again, for the public as well as the board. We wrote our original opening plan and submitted it to the state on the 24th. It was the product of many, 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 many hours of work. We had surveyed our community multiple times, and we submitted a plan that included, as required, 3 different ways to open: full, hybrid, and closure. Those plans remain in place to be utilized as necessary based on health metrics. And we did reopen in a hybrid because on the 27th of July, we were told that that would become an option. And we took that option, and Joe and Megan kind of highlighted why we took that option. We needed to start in a way that made people feel comfortable, got them used to all of this new mask wearing, hall walking, seat distancing, food product handouts, everything we are doing is so different from what we've done before. And so it just made it easier for staff, for students, and for families to get used to that. I know also there's a burden on families, especially parents of little ones who have trouble getting back to work and to the office or to their jobs because they have little ones home 3 days a week. And so we knew that we wanted to move into a full in-person program if the health metrics indicated that that was appropriate. And we are approaching that date. So to prepare for that, and because we have a number of weeks behind us, the administrative team has been reviewing our current reopening plan. Remember, written all the way back on July 24th, which in COVID times is an eon ago. So we've been tweaking it. They've been working on it in each building, and the tweaks have been in the form of plans for cafeteria use, plans for feeding students. They've been in the form of some of the language and the direction in social distancing. We've also been making some physical changes to our buildings beyond what we already had done, so that we can accommodate all of our students. And at this point, there are no indications that are out there that would tell us that we can't reopen on October 5th in full. So we are tomorrow, the administrative team will be meeting, reviewing all the tweaks and changes, and then we'll be submitting those to the Connecticut River Area Health District to make sure we have not overlooked something. And we'll send them to you at that point, and we have to resubmit them to the state. Also going on by the end of this week is a survey going out to parents, students, our older students, and staff about how the experience of distance learning has been so far. For parents, they'll be asked the question, do you intend to send your children to school beginning October 5th? And then that repeat question of, do you intend to use our transportation as of October 5th? So we're following the guidance. The guidance would still indicate that this is appropriate. If things change a lot in the next 2 weeks, or any time after that, then obviously we'll be telling a different story and looking for a different way of approaching things. Something that's important to think about is that in Old Saybrook, because we're small, because we are really very fortunate to have the support of our community in many ways, including financially, our class sizes are relatively small. So I pulled some numbers earlier today. I asked someone here in the district to do that. At our middle school, our largest class has 22 students in it. The average class has 15 students in it. In some district, that is the hybrid. That's half of what a class might look like. The high school's largest class is 24. This does not include the big music ensemble classes. And the average class size at the high school is 13. So we think we have the space for this. We feel comfortable that if we're using all of our mitigating factors, social distancing, mask wearing, hand washing, hand sanitizing, that we will be able to pull this off successfully as long as our community stays healthy. And obviously we recognize that we're part of that community. So we're going to be very cognizant of what's going on around us. We know that we have 4 or 5 families who have already indicated that they've pulled their children out temporarily, just not for homeschooling. They're still our students, but they're intending to send them back on October 5th. I would imagine we're also going to learn that some people plan to pull their children out and have them temporarily at home while the state allows it by October 5th. I'm sure that the survey is going to show us some people are going in a different direction. But we feel really comfortable that we are ready. We'll certainly be ready after CRAD reviews it and gives us, as they did last time, they actually did walkthroughs of all of our buildings last time. But that's why things that like these shields, like additional mitigation will be important, because we will be putting more students in our buildings. Obviously, we'll be putting twice as many students in our buildings. Mrs. Pendleton has already had the heating folks, ventilation folks come in and maximize our outdoor intake. So everybody wear your jackets in a few weeks, because we'll be getting lots of fresh air in our buildings. And, we're really sticking to the surgical masks, or in some cases KN95s, because then I don't need to worry about who's coming in with a mask that may or may not be as useful as this one is. I want to talk about that for a minute. There have been, on the parent phone calls that we've been having every week, there have been lots and lots of questions about masks. And I think we are in the minority of school districts requiring students and staff to wear the masks that we're providing. And I would imagine we're in the minority because, there are conflicts about that. We also may not always be able to get those masks. But while we can, and Mrs. Pendleton keeps getting right back in line every time we get some, she kind of gets out of line, gets back in again. While we can, we're going to do this. We don't have the staff to check the quality of masks every day across the district. And so while I have been discussing this at parent meetings and saying that we would consider changing, I think more and more, hearing from the medical folks, the Department of Public Health, that the mask is our best defense. No matter whether we're talking about, and the debate is on now about, is it droplets or is it aerosolizing? The mask is our best defense. And in some cases where the mask is more difficult for a student, then teachers have additional protection that they can use in the form of shields, which we were able to get for everybody. Thirdly, things like the desk shields, while cumbersome, they will allow us to put students in a room. We will not always achieve 6 feet distance in every setting, in every situation. I've observed a couple classes already where students get much closer than that for a period of time. We try to minimize that, mitigate it, keep it under 15 minutes, keep it as distant as possible. But as you might imagine, with hundreds of students moving around, it's not necessarily always going to happen. So every layer of protection we can add is, I hope, another day, another week we can stay in school. So with that, let me stop for a minute and see what questions you might have.
So Jan, I have a question regarding music, chorus. I know that a lot of recommendations were that students not necessarily be singing unless they're going to do it outside. I didn't know how we're doing it, because that's certainly presents a challenge?
So our plan spells out exactly how we're doing both chorus and instrumental music. And actually, Joe, Megan, Amity, Julie, jump in at any point here. We have purchased special masks for instrumental music. We have required 12-foot distancing. With some, that we get a whole piece of guidance, addendum, I don't remember the number, from the state of Connecticut about music instruction. And we used their guidance either as the baseline and we added to it, or we stuck with their guidance. In some cases, they said we could hold classes in a 6x9 spacing. We increased that to 12-foot spacing across the boards, mostly because it was too confusing. You know, if you were doing this activity, it was 6x9. If you were doing this activity, it was 12 feet. And we thought, this is crazy. Amity, Joe, Megan, want to talk at all about experiences?
Yeah, sure. I am in chorus and band. Right now, we are waiting on the band PPEs, the masks that are suited for band students. So when we do go outside, it has to be 70 degrees, which it hasn't been. So we haven't really been playing too much except for the first day of school. But that is the plan that's implemented right now. We also have we all have accounts on a website called Soundtrap, which is like a more user-friendly version of a GarageBand, which can be used for recording so that students who are doing things at home in either band or chorus can make recordings, can post these recordings, and can, instead of just trying to sing it and put them together and just hope it works, they can do a little bit more editing on the distance learning side of chorus or band. That's worked very well. In chorus, we are currently rehearsing in the auditorium. The seats are all 12 feet apart, and we have special masks that don't, when we take breaths, we don't want the surgical masks to go in our mouths, which is something that happens. So we have special masks that we were given that are kind of looks like a duck bill. It's much longer so that it doesn't, when you breathe in, it doesn't get sucked into your mouth. So really chorus was cut in half, and I think that I'm in cohort 1, and I think that it was kind of disproportionately cut very small in cohort 1. So we have not that many students there right now in chorus 2, or gold chorus. But I do think that problem will be fixed if we go back fully. But yeah, right now the plan is auditorium 12 feet apart with the special masks, and everything seems to be going pretty well so far.
I'm so glad to hear your perspective, Joe, as somebody who's participating in both. I have to say that I have been so impressed by both chorus and band's response to the limitations since the beginning of COVID. The creativity and the respect for the need to adhere to modifications is very, very high from my observation. And the creativity that has emerged to be able to allow students to continue to sing and play and to use the tools that are available has just been really, really impressive. I mean, for those of you who watched the graduation, that blending of students playing from home was just so incredible. And so I just applaud the band and chorus instructors and the students for adapting, because it's just really, it's remarkable what they've done. Old Saybrook always gets credited with their support of the arts, and I think that now, especially during this time, that's so important to have that creative outlet. And I just think it's tremendous how they've responded in the way that they have.
And Joe, thanks for the update on the masks. I didn't realize that students were receiving different masks. Makes good sense, but that educates us as well. Be curious to see them if they're yellow.
Yeah, they're funny looking, all right. Yeah. They also don't smell awesome yet, but it's worth it. And I certainly second the praise for the music staff getting us going this year. It's definitely been much better than nothing. And really, it's been all but nothing. We've been able to do most of the things we were able to do before in chorus. And with the exception of just waiting for the band masks, and I mean, really, I've only had 3 days in school in band because of the way that the schedule works out right now. So I really haven't missed out too much playing in person, and I've been able to play at home. So that's been something that we've been really thankful for. And I definitely second the praise for the music staff. I think it's really awesome what we're doing right now.
warm weather's coming, Joe, so hopefully be able to. And I'm going to take a risk and mention someone by name because I agree the whole staff has done amazing work. But Jeremy Taylor worked all summer to make this happen. And he read every piece of research he could find, and he's the one who came up with the ideas for the masks. And with his group of folks, really impressive, hard work, and just diligent about pursuing things.
And are the band masks different?
The instrument masks, yes.
I don't really know too much about them yet. I haven't seen them because we haven't had them in yet. I've heard that the middle school has some of them. That maybe that's wrong. Don't hold me to that. I'm pretty sure that's what that is what Mr. Carruthers had told us, that middle school had gotten like half of their shipment of masks, but somehow none of the rest of the schools got their masks. So she was a little bit confused about that. But I actually don't entirely know how that's going to work. There might be instrument specific as well. I'm not really sure. But I'm sure that we could, Megan and I could update the board on what that looks like when we're in for our next meeting.
No, that would be great. This is the first time I've heard of it. That's great.
Excellent. Other questions for Jan on her update?
A quick question, Jan. What we're doing about families who change their minds? Let's say they just really want to be home for distance learning. Is there a certain amount of time that you're saying, okay, you have a few days, a week to do a shift to get the student back into school if they then want to come back?
We actually, the folks who did make that change to come into school did it early on so far, so we were able to accommodate them pretty quickly. But we have said that it might take up to a week to accommodate, to get students put into the classroom. The one thing that allows us to do it a little bit more quickly is, up to this point, our staffing has allowed us to assign students who are home, even if they're home temporarily permanently, if there is such a thing. We have assigned them to the classroom teacher that they would have been assigned to, in the hope that when they come back, when they choose to come back, they'll feel comfortable, they'll know their teacher. You know, if we end up losing staff for whatever reason, whether it's ADA claims or FML or, God forbid, illness, we might have to change our stance on that. But we've been really fortunate so far. So that allows it to move quickly.
That's great. Thank you for that update.
Of course.
Other questions for Jan?
This is George.
Go ahead, George.
Jan, just a quick question. So, just in terms of what our neighboring schools are doing, Westbrook, certainly, I think I remember reading that they decided to open fully because their school is so small that by going hybrid, they'll have almost no students left in the classroom. I think they went full from day one. Do you know if the other schools near us, Limo Line, East Line, Essex and so on, what are they doing?
So Limo Line began full, and they're still in full. And I meet with these superintendents once a week, and we update each other on, problems and successes. It's really very helpful. So I have the benefit of being on either side of us has gone in full, and so learning from them has been terrific. Region 4 went in hybrid with plans, I believe, still to move over to full. And that hybrid moving to full, either at all schools or at least K through 8, is pretty much the model of most of this region. So most of them are planning to move sometime in October to the full plan, based on, as long as the data indicates that they should. And again, some are moving K through 8, some are moving K through 12.
Thank you.
Quick questions, Karen?
Go ahead, Karen.
So Jan, either yourself or collectively with the superintendents you meet, what do you find to be the ongoing biggest challenge you're facing still trying to resolve?
I think that the speed at which the guidance changes has continued to be problematic, because we'll tell people to do something this week and have to change it next week. And so I think that you're really fortunate if you're a superintendent who's been somewhere for a while and people know you, because I think if you're brand new, it's very hard to explain these adjustments. That has continued to be a problem. The other problem has been really, I know this sounds like it should be less important than academics, but there's been so much discussion around sports and extracurricular and what is a safe level of risk. At what point are our extracurricular and athletic programs causing potential risk to our academic programs? What is the right balance, knowing how important those things are to students? That has continued to occupy a lot of our time. Yeah, I think that's really it. And then we've shared information with each other. So those superintendents who have had experiences of a positive case of COVID have shared with us, how they've responded to it. Because we all have it in theory. We all have our letters written. We're all ready to go. But let's face it, you have to experience it. And again, I've had the advantage of having conversations with my colleagues about their experiences in that regard. I think those are the biggies. But honestly, this has gone for all of us, whether people chose in person or hybrid. This has gone so much better than we anticipated. Personnel has been a huge issue for some districts.
And I agree. The athletics and the extracurricular activities, that's such a critical component for, our overall education of our kids. And that is very tricky.
There's no perfect answer on that one.
Yeah.
There's no perfect answer.
You want them there, but you want them healthy. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Tara, I have a question for Jan.
Go right ahead, Alan. Thanks.
Hi, Jan. So in relation to a follow-up to what Karen asked, I'm curious about the parents, what they're experiencing, particularly in terms of all the Chromebooks and all the technology that's been issued. And I guess we probably worked out most of the kinks in the spring, but I'm wondering if there's still issues with technology, Wi-Fi, or, for the most part, is everybody engaged, all, parents and kids at home? Or if there are not, are there issues that we've overcome?
So the short answer is yes. We have fantastic engagement. We are required to report to the state starting last Wednesday or the Wednesday before. Every Wednesday, we have to report how many students are working from home, how many are in class, how many are not engaged, have disconnected. And our number has been 0, because by the definition that the state gave us, we don't have anyone who has disengaged. But to answer the bigger question about, problems and difficulties, again, another shout out to our IT department, who this summer anticipated the things that could become problematic this year, like bandwidth. And so bandwidth was moved over to a new server. So we have a new server that allows all of our one-to-ones, and students might notice they're using a one-to-one address right now. They have the largest bandwidth. So we're moving our bandwidth over so that students who are on Chromebooks and on laptops from home or from here in our district, they have access to what they need to access, and they're staying safe because they're within the Old Saybrook Public Schools protection. Amity, did you want to say, is there anything else you would add on technology, since you work with that department so closely?
Honestly, Jan, I think that you covered most of it. It has been a real challenge for them. They've worked incredibly hard, but most of what they've done has been successful, and that's always when we don't hear about them.
Thank you both. That's great information, and it's remarkable that the school district's been able to pivot, so quickly and adapt. And we're well positioned going forward if we have to do this again. So thanks for the update.
We are, and thank you for saying that, Alan. We were crossing our fingers in the last week, thinking, what happens when everybody logs on at once? What's going to happen? And it's not to say it's been perfect. I was observing a class, and a student said, the Google meeting got dropped. I missed everything you said. What I was impressed by was the teacher said, that's okay. I posted everything in the Google Classroom, and if you email me later, I will tell you anything that you didn't understand. So there was a fix-up strategy for that. Now, that Google Classroom could have dropped for that child for a number of reasons, some of which would be beyond our control. Even Google's been having trouble. But there are backup practices in place, and teachers and IT and students and families are getting better at the backup. So I think we're only going to improve.
That
I have to say,
is important.
as a parent, we had a random power outage on our street on Wednesday, which was like, I think the full remote day. And that was like, oh my gosh, how do we manage that? But it seemed to be fine. You know, it didn't affect the students negatively. But it was something like unexpected. When we have a storm and we know half the town will be out, that's one thing. But then the random loss of half a street was just crazy.
Well, I've been looking for a place to announce this, Karina, so this is my chance. We were all excited because we thought, this is great. Now when we have snow days, students will be able to continue the day from home. Unfortunately, we were told by the state, not true, that closings due to bad weather will be considered closed school days. I'm hoping that we can continue that conversation and convince them to think of it differently. But for the very reason that you just said, that during a storm, you could have a percentage of your student population that can't participate. And how do they make up that day? So interesting perspective, but I thought it was a no-brainer. Snow days are no more. Apparently not true.
Any update on the English language learners? Have they been able to access remotely?
Yes, I'm going to turn that one right over to Mrs. Goss because she became the interview of the week for the newspaper on this topic.
But I wish that they had shared how amazing our bilingual staff has been at supporting all of our kiddos and their families. It's been absolutely amazing. Every single one of our students has stayed connected. Every English learner has been connected through both our classroom teachers and our bilingual staff. And I will say that we had 4 initially, 2 of whom were sick, non-COVID sick, just plain old sick, who weren't attending, and then 2 who were potentially disengaged. And the high school worked really hard with Melissa Vasquez McCoy and Aaron Reed to pull that family into school and discuss what was expected and what was needed. And through a little bit of translation and a little bit of mom support, those kids are back in school and with us even on remote days.
Great.
Nice. Yeah, and that was a great interview with Amity. It was nice to see some successes. You know, it was a lovely article and great publicity for you guys.
Is that Harbor News?
It was the Connecticut Examiner, Eileen. I think their online newspaper.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was excellent. So great job on that, Amity. It was nice to see our school being celebrated.
So Tara, can we get a copy of the interview?
I'm sure. I'm sure we can.
Great.
I can email it to Jan and she can send it.
That'd be
awesome. I was literally just thinking, I'm like, cut and paste. Excellent. Thank you, Amity and Jan.
Congratulations, Amity.
Awesome. Other questions for Jan or Amity about our reopening plans? All right, then. So we'll move on then, Jan, to our strategic plan update.
Yes, so this will be a bit of a standing item, I think, for a while for the board meetings. As you know, we've been working with the Connecticut Center for School Change. Mrs. Goss and I had a meeting with Isabel Stevenson, last week, about finalizing some ideas and mostly schedules. Tomorrow, Isabel, so she's met with the board, and she's going to meet with the administrators tomorrow during our regular district leadership team meeting. She's looking for us to create a guiding coalition group. She said typically it's, a lot of the folks who will be implementing the work. But the guiding coalition group would be a small team of people who run the work forward, make sure things stay on task here, boots on the ground. I'm going to ask the administrative team to be a large part of that. But if we have a board member who could come to participate in meetings occasionally during the day, that would be terrific as well. And we'll talk to Isabel tomorrow about should we grow the group beyond that at all. she'll meet with you again on the 6th of October, talk about some of the questions she uses during stakeholder group meetings and in surveys. We have some of those questions written, and I can talk to you a little bit about them right now. And then she will go through the process of meeting with all the stakeholder groups, and then we'll meet with you again at the end of October. So the questions, I'm toggling to that notebook right now. Okay, here it is. Here's sample questions for external stakeholder survey. What knowledge, skills, and dispositions do you think are most important for graduating seniors to have? You know, our goal here would be, we're hoping we're going to hear a validation of the portrait of the graduate, but we'll find out. What matters to you most about the educational opportunities, experiences that are currently offered to students at Old Saybrook Public Schools? And then the follow-up question, of course, what would you change regarding the academic program in Old Saybrook Public Schools and why? To what degree do you think the district adheres to its current strategic plan? This is sort of to me, this question is about, do they know the plan? Do they believe it matters to us? And is it being communicated? And so there's multiple layers of kind of finding out where we are on that. There will be inclusivity and student voice questions, bias questions. Does everybody feel included, to sort of drive any stakeholder work that we want to do in the future? And that's just an example for the outside stakeholders. Now, the examples for the other groups, administrators and staff, students, they'll be similar. They'll be obviously appropriate to their particular role in the district, but they will be similar, and we'll be providing multiple opportunities for people to express themselves, as we did last time when we did our strategic plan and had over 500 distinct pieces of data to work with, because people either chose to participate by survey. And I predict that because many meetings will be using this format, we may get better involvement, because people don't necessarily have to leave their homes and can come to these meetings for either part or all of an evening. So moving forward, the work is getting done. You know, it's a little bit hiccupy. It's not quite start and keep moving, because we've had to stop and pay attention to the more immediate needs of our current situation. But still, we're moving forward. And I think that these kickoff meetings with you and with the administrators really will move things into the next steps. And actually, the timing, I think, is good. I think if we had tried to meet with parents and students earlier in this academic year, when everyone was trying to adjust to this, I'm not sure it would have been fruitful. So I'm actually excited that we're going to be doing most of the meetings in October or the beginning of November. And I'm happy to take questions.
I think I agree with your last statement, Jan. By doing it now, it sort of offers us some insights into some different things that we might not have considered before students went back to school, and some of the things that we may want to ensure are included in the strategic plan. So,
right. I'm worried that if we're too COVID centric, we won't look forward 4 and 5 years, which is such an essential part of this process. Because the strategic plan, I hope, will long outlive our current situation, and we don't want it to be, we don't want the vision of it to be somehow stymied by what we're dealing with every day.
Right.
So Jan, all these meetings will be all done virtually.
I believe so at this point, Eileen. I think
so that's different too.
I worry, I wouldn't want to expose students or staff unnecessarily. We haven't even been having faculty meetings in person. Everyone's been staying in their classrooms and you know, calling in or using Google Meets to do that, just to keep people safe so they can stay in the classroom as long as possible and be well.
Is there a way, Jan, like you had mentioned, for parents to really know? It's hard enough for board members to know if we've been sticking to the strategic plan. What were some of the objectives that weren't met, right? What do we want to carry over? Sometimes families aren't necessarily in the know on those things.
Yeah, I think that we did, well, it's hard for me to say. I think we did a good job. We did a lot to communicate our strategic plan in the first 3 years that it was in existence. It was part of parent meetings. I can remember nights where Mrs. Goss and I were standing up in front of a room full of parents, talking about the goals of the plan. I think last year we did less of that. Because the strategic plan was so far along, we were really getting into the weeds of it, and B, because things changed so strangely last year. So I think my last 2 parent nights were canceled last year, at least the last one. So I don't know, Eileen. I don't know that when the surveys are in and the stakeholders respond, if they will feel like I didn't really know that, or I'd forgotten that.
Right.
That will be important information for
It
us.
is, yeah.
More important, I think, is that at the end of the day, when they hear the plan, when they hear the mission statement and they see the action steps again, whether it jogs their memory or not, do they really think we're doing those things? Because we do, you get those updates from us all the time, and we see the action steps that we have taken. But is it obvious that this is all part of a grand scheme and a theme to put out the best possible graduates into the world at large?
Maybe your profile of a graduate you put together so well is a good, springboard to be able to answer the questions about the strategic plan, because my thought is that the strategic plan will be very much linked to the profile of the graduate.
Yeah, they're inextricably linked. They kind of are. The profile of the graduate has its genesis, and the theory of action has its genesis in the strategic plan. But now the strategic plan is sort of not out in front of it, but matching step with it. They really go hand in hand.
That's a good way, instead of going through all those pages, of kind of going, this is what we believe, and this is what we're doing to get there, and this is what we still need to get there.
Yeah, and those pages of action steps, they do a lot for us internally. It keeps us honest. It becomes almost a checklist. We are doing it. We are moving forward. We're hitting hiccups here. That's really important for us. We post them on the website just so families and staff and the community and the world at large knows that we're moving it along. But I think those documents actually probably have more meaning to us because we're the ones rolling up our sleeves and trying to get the work done.
Thanks.
Jan, did you want to volunteer from the board for that one panel you had mentioned?
Yes, if it's someone who could come during the day, and I don't think there wouldn't have to be at every meeting. I'm not even sure how many meetings we're talking about. It's probably what Isabel was saying, that they're sort of base touching meetings, like moving along, how we doing. Yes, that would be great.
I mean, Jan, it would really depend on what days the committee meets, because I'm available several days, but others I'm just not. So do you have a schedule at this point, or?
I don't. We can probably be a little bit flexible. So if it's okay with you, Tara, I'll just reach out to Karen tomorrow. Is that okay?
That's completely fine. Okay. And if there's anybody else on the board that's interested, I'd say reach out to Jan directly for the schedule.
Thank you.
Great. Other questions for Jan about the strategic plan update?
This is George.
Go ahead, George.
So, when we start thinking about the next strategic plan to sort of build on the previous one, we started talking about that pre-COVID, and we had anticipation where we would be at the end of the current plan, and we would just build up on that, which is hard to work. Are there any parts of the current plan that we basically have took we paused, we didn't go as far as we probably would because of the last 6 months or 8 months, or we've actually taken a step back? And so essentially we have to basically recalibrate where we are now to basically go forward. Did they just, it'd be hard to imagine that we basically kept, lockstep through the entire time. I find it hard to believe. I know that the school district is doing an amazing job trying to do the best it can in the situation, but I think the learning environment is still probably not as optimal as it was in that full environment. And so there's got to be some plans in the next 5 years to sort of accommodate that, or at least address that, or that. So, and it's difficult, right? I'm not exactly sure what that means, but reality, right?
So, George, I'm going to be a little bit Pollyanna here and say that the silver lining is alive and well in this situation. It's not easy, and I have not even gone back to see where we may have lost some ground in some areas. One that comes to mind right away, but then I'm not so sure, is how are we doing with internships, capstones, and senior and community service, which is so much a part of the experiential learning that we feel dedicated to. And while I don't have definitive answers, I have heard that our staff is coming up with some creative ways to do some of these things that open up new opportunities that we would not have thought of if we didn't have to think of them. So I think we're going to have some pleasant surprises. Having said that, I think we're also going to find that if we weren't way ahead on something, we may have lost some ground. We were way ahead on a number of our initiatives, so we were feeling really good about it. But we'll know more. Typically, I review that with the administrative team, and we're going to try to squeeze that in before the board's self-evaluation meeting that happens in October. So I'll have more definitive. But I do think that there have been a number of discussions at the central office level and perhaps at the building administrator level, and probably not yet at other levels. Because remember, we worked on this all summer long. So we've already gone through all the phases of grief, you know. We've gone through the disbelief and the anger and the crying, and then we got to the, all right, let's just do this. And so I think we are now in a place where we're saying we're learning a lot about ourselves and what is really essential about instruction and learning when you boil it down. Like what absolutely must be part of a lesson, what absolutely must be part of learning, no matter what the format is. So we're having that conversation at this level, and I anticipate as educators across the state, the country, and in our district get more and more comfortable with the craziness of the classroom right now. 50% of your kids are there, and 50% of your kids are there, and I'm watching that, and that is anxiety producing. I think once we get beyond those anxieties, I think we're going to find we are learning a lot about ourselves. And I think that's another reason why we didn't want to put off this strategic plan work, because we might be at the right time to do it as we learn more about us. And again, I don't know if anybody wants to put anything in there. I'm looking at Amity and Julie, but maybe someone else has some thoughts on that too. Amity does.
Actually, some of the things that have been offered up for internships have been amazing and innovative, and may actually get us closer to 100% than the traditional way that we were doing it before exclusively. So that's been really exciting. We've also had a really great opportunity to look at meaningful and essential. Those are some key words from our current strategic plan. And I think that nobody ever really felt the urgency of meaningful and essential quite like we have during this time. And so we've been able to make huge leaps and bounds toward focusing on what's meaningful and essential, and personalization too. I mean, the opportunities to personalize instruction through these different channels have been really huge. So, you know, there have been a few things, some professional development things that we haven't been able to do as robustly as we would have before. I'm making up words now, robustly. I think that overall, we will come out ahead in most areas and behind in very few, because we're just learning different things than we expected to, but it's not all bad.
Thanks, Sammy. That was a great question, George. And I'll be interested to see where that goes, guys, because it does open up kind of a wealth of opportunities, and certainly thinking about things differently, right? Nothing like it when you're forced into it. Other questions?
Yeah, a question for Jan. So keeping all that in mind, it was just said, you know, the strategic plan is a behemoth of a document with action steps that get added so often, and it becomes this, you know, successful plan that gets, I would say, shelved or not celebrated adequately. So, you know, with COVID in mind, there's been so many things to focus on other than celebrating the successes. So I would encourage in whatever way or shape, all the successes that were achieved over the last 3-4 years with this strategic plan get celebrated in some way. Certainly having on the website for parents to see a condensed version to say, hey, this is where we really have made some gains, yet recognizing some things that would continue in the new strategic plan. But again, celebrating all the things, all the hundreds and thousands of hours that were, put into this. So encourage in some way that, Jan and her team celebrate all that has been done.
Great advice, Alan.
Yeah, great suggestion, Alan. Other questions or comments for Jan?
I think it's not a question. I just think the honesty that Jan and Amity present is so important because school districts really want to achieve, and sometimes they need more time to get there. And that's important. And so when families get to hear where school districts are or where Old Saybrook is, then if they can help in any way to move it along, they know that the district is thoughtful and honest. And I think that's really important.
Eileen, I will never forget one Board of Education meeting many years ago where someone asked me, so some of these bigger things, how long do you think they'll take? And I said, probably up to 10 years.
I remember that.
And I thought people were going to fall off their chairs, but
yeah,
I think we can see why. We're talking about meaningful, sustained, long-term, forever kind of change. And forever change, can't be driven by just one person or one document.
Yeah.
It can't be done quickly, certainly. It's not something you rush through because it doesn't last. It doesn't last beyond the tenure of the leader. That person's gone in 3 years, then so is all the work. So you need to build something that is a foundation and that sustains no matter who's in the seat, no matter what happens. But that also has to be ready to change. And I think that COVID's a perfect example of something that we have had to react and respond to that needs to make us amend portions of our plan. And as Amity said, some of those amendments are actually probably better.
We're also fortunate that the district leadership team has remained constant.
Yes.
That's really essential, and to be able to move things along. And sometimes that's beyond individuals' control, but that's really because it's taken time to gel, taken time for people to understand each other's needs across the district. And so we're really very fortunate.
Yeah, we are. We're very lucky in that regard that we have a lot of seasoned administrators at this really difficult time.
Absolutely. Other questions for Jan? Great. Well, then we will move on. Thanks. That was a great update, Jan.
Thank you.
So let us move on to the athletics update.
So just quickly, and Megan may be able to help us with this. You heard the student report about athletics. You saw a message that was emailed to all of you today from Trent Gerbers about middle school sports. And again, as I said earlier to Karen, we are doing our best to strike a balance between safety and giving students those important experiences. You probably heard that 11-on-11 football is not possible this fall. Whether or not it gets revisited for the spring, I guess still seems to be a question. There was a long debate that you probably heard played out on the morning news every day between the Department of Public Health and CIAC. At the end of the day, my statement when asked was, whatever the Department of Public Health tells me to do when it comes to health and safety, I'm going to try to do. So 11-on-11 football is not a possibility. There's still some talk about 7-on-7 touch football, flag football. I assume I'll be hearing more at my Thursday meeting with superintendents. And there's still the discussion about whether or not it is appropriate to allow fans at games. And what might that look like? Are we talking about no fans? Are we talking about fans only for outdoor sports? What we have to crosswalk the current executive orders on gatherings, and how would we police or monitor if we did say every athlete can have 2 fans? How would we police and monitor that? So I know the Shoreline principals and the Shoreline athletic directors have talked about that. I have a meeting with the athletic director tomorrow afternoon. I'm assuming I'm going to get an update on that, and he and I are going to talk about a number of things. But we have to make a decision about what, again, striking that balance between safety and allowing people to have a typical experience. To me, number one is academics. Number two is giving students those extracurricular and athletic experiences that they value. But of course, above it all is safety. And I'm not going to extend. I don't want to extend Old Saybrook Public Schools to a point where we really are compromising safety if we do something extreme. So things like transportation, we're not quite sure how many students we want to put on a bus. So are we sending 2 and 3 buses? Are we, who will we compete against? All of these things have been worked out and are being worked out still and tweaked constantly. And I know that's difficult on students because they're constantly being given new information about what the season will look like. But no one, I think it was just a case of no one really had the time to deal with this until schools got open, and then the Department of Public Health and others were able to take it up. So at this point, a few things are still unanswered. Right now, we're planning to go ahead with the fall season, starting, as Megan said, in October. It will be an abbreviated season. There'll be all kinds of rules about not using locker rooms, not sharing indoor spaces. We don't have girls volleyball, but that one indoor fall sport is facing all kinds of amendments to the way they play and participate. We're going to just continue to strike that balance. I really was hoping I'd hear a little bit from you tonight about what you're thinking in this area. I'm telling you how I feel about it. I've told that to our athletic director and our administrators as well. I know they've shared that with coaches, but looking for some thoughts about it from the board's perspective. And I don't know, Megan, before we turn it over to the board, is there anything that you want to say, since you opened with some reports on athletics?
Jan, it's Jan. I have a question that I've been asked, and I certainly can't answer it, but I'm sure you can shed some light on the thinking of the, and I know it's not your thinking, it's the, the athletic group. What is the thinking not to allow football, but to allow soccer or field hockey? I mean, the kids, I understand in football they, quote, hit each other, but in soccer, when 2 students go to head a ball, or field hockey, when, the girls are facing off, what is the difference in terms of allowing those sports to go ahead, but not football?
So it was defined as 2 particular points in football: the line and the tackle. So those are 2 places where there's an extended exposure, face to face, or a group of people who are kind of in very close proximity, and it may take a while to get out of that pile of people on the ground. That's my understanding of what made football considered high risk. And I'll give you the other example of girls volleyball, which again doesn't impact our school. That's an indoor sport, so you don't have the advantage of being outdoors.
Right.
They're not that close to each other, but they can get that close to each other. There's a lot of yelling and projecting because they call to each other during the game, and that's what made that sport considered to be a higher risk sport than soccer, field hockey.
Thank you. That's helpful.
You're welcome. Megan, was there anything you wanted to add?
Just one thing to answer Jan's question. Also, I know that some rule changes are happening for some sports. Currently, they haven't announced it in Connecticut, but in Massachusetts, for soccer games, they're not allowing throw-ins and they're not allowing heading. Somebody at my soccer practice said something about there's no spitting. Like if you spit on the field, you get a red card now this year, which would be new. So I don't know if they haven't released the rules for Connecticut yet, but they're definitely looking at rule changes for the safety. And then the other thing that I was going to add is that the only time that CIAC has talked about fans being allowed right now is on senior days. And as of right now, the rule is each senior would get 2 members allowed. And then I know that within the Shoreline Conference, a big discussion is allowing senior day to happen on the first game in order to have your best like possibility of allowing it to happen that way. If you waited till the last home game, like we don't know, there's so much unknown until then. So they're looking at moving senior day to the beginning of the season. And there's also a proposal out to the CIAC right now about doing like a integrated plan to allow fans. So it would be 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks of competition, no fans, and then as time goes on, slowly integrating the number of fans allowed at a game back in. It's pretty much following the plan that the CIC used for athletes and how to practice with each other. So that I know is a proposal that has been brought to the CIC. We just don't have the results on that yet.
Thank you.
So, Megan, I've got a question for you as a student athlete. Would you, if given the opportunity, is it more important for you to play and be able to play as much as you can as opposed to having that fan experience? I have a child that's a student athlete, and I know that was kind of his position. He's like, I'd rather just play. I don't really care who's there. But I was just curious of kind of what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I personally would definitely prefer to play for as long as possible versus the fans. But I think because I'm a senior, the senior day thing, it's not my choice of how I'd want it to be. But obviously, I'm thankful that as for now, they're still allowing 2 people for whenever that happens. But yes, I definitely prefer to have less fans and be able to play for longer because I know that they're also looking to live stream the games. So
that's great. Yeah, I hope that's the case. It would be nice to have that available for people. Jan, is that something that we, obviously not having football this year, that certainly frees up the turf field, at least at this point, depending on what they do with the 7-on-7 idea. Would we have the technology available to be able to live stream our games?
We currently have the technology to record our games, but live streaming we don't, although our athletic director has been looking into it. When we met with all of the Shoreline superintendents, principals, and athletic directors, what we learned is some of us could do that, are ready to, or could be ready to do that, and some are not. And there was some concern about that inequity amongst the Shoreline schools. So I'm thinking that there's probably a Shoreline meeting in our future again. Where we talk about all of this, fans and live streaming. But I would like to be able to do at least one of those things for our parents, particularly our parents of our seniors. So
right.
More to come on that.
That CIAC certainly is looking at plans for the senior day for the students. I mean, in whatever limited way we can do that, that's usually such a lovely experience. And I hope that we as a school district consider something if we aren't able to have a football season, to be able to do something to celebrate those students that, are seniors and certainly going to be moving on. They certainly should be able to have that same kind of, even if it's limited experience.
The other thing that I wanted to add was the CIC switched the game schedule so that you're only playing towns within your conference. So our games are only against the Shoreline teams, not past that, because they just want to reduce the number of people that you're interacting with. So it's also, you can only have 2 games a week right now, and there's less games. It's 12 games, and they currently also don't have a plan for the tournament because they don't know what they want to do with mixing kids from Old Seabrook all the way up to the top of the state.
Yeah, that would make the cohorting, the contact tracing, and the possible impact of positive cases really damaging.
So I don't want to hog all the questions. Questions for Jan in regard to the athletics update.
Just a comment. This is Karina regarding fans, and again, I'm not that close to it, but especially if we're playing just shoreline schools, it seems that that population is much smaller than schools in other parts of the state, and so that I think by default means your fan population is smaller because fewer students. I don't know. So I wonder if it just seems that there are other public gatherings of large numbers of people that it just seems like there should be a way to have fans at the games. And even maybe it's, you can attend home games where your student is playing or, something innovative or different. But it just seems like there should be a way and that parents would be mindful because I think it's important to parents as well, especially as Megan said, for seniors, and that, they can be responsible for spacing themselves out appropriately. Just a comment, for what it's worth.
Thanks, Karina. Other questions or comments for Jan? Great. So Jan, I actually have a question. I'm sorry for all the questions tonight. So when does actually our sports season start? I know that CISD has had that kind of be a moving target. So when we've got soccer, cross country, field hockey, when are those seasons starting?
I have not seen a schedule yet, but the official start is October 1st.
Okay. All right, cool. So I think this is a good update for us to keep on the agenda, especially as this season gets started. So I think if we can keep this on there as an open item, Jan, I would appreciate that. Any other questions before we move on? All right, thank you. All right, so moving on to the budget and facilities report.
Mrs. Pendleton, would you please?
Okay, so in an effort not to be redundant, because a lot of these topics were already spoken about, but as you can imagine, just like the start of school, start of the budget for this year has been a bit of a juggling act, a bit of a moving target, shall we say, and certainly we're still up in the air on a number of items that we, are purchasing, encumbering, anticipating that we might need. So two things to note. We have looked at our staffing, which is our biggest line item in the budget, both certified and non-certified staff. And we are right at the moment with what we know and what we have in place, we're kind of at a break even. But that, as you know, has again been a bit of a moving target. We've had many pluses and minuses along the way, and a number of increases in areas that you might expect, like in the area of custodial staff, as well as monitors on buses and monitors at the school. So paraprofessionals have been doing a lot of that work. So it is an ongoing moving target, which we are watching closely to keep an eye on. And sort of related to that was we got just today, we received notice from the state as to our grant or our funds that have been awarded to us potentially based on, again, a estimate that we did midsummer, not knowing exactly what we were going to need. And so we received a budget today that we need to now respond to by October 2nd. And for instance, we didn't know if we were going to need more buses, if we were going to do double runs or that sort of thing. So some of the areas that we were awarded funds in, we probably won't be able to utilize. That's an example of one area. So now we'll refine those numbers and those awards, and we'll we're working on all of the areas in which we anticipate additional purchases, as well as those areas that funds may have been awarded in that we're not going to be able to use. So it's really been a difficult task to stay on top of the pluses and minuses. The superintendent and I today just talked about the fact that when all the kids come back, we may need some more desks, some more furniture for classrooms. Again, part of the funds that we're receiving that was allocated in there as well. So there's just an ongoing list of PPE and things that we're ordering. But we've managed, I think, to try to keep things as balanced as possible. And it's going to be an extensive monthly update each report that you receive as to where we are in a variety of areas where the pluses and minuses will land. I'm happy to answer a specific question that you have in regards to the report, but those are probably the highlights at this point.
Thanks, Julie. Does anybody have questions for Julie in regards to our report?
So Julie, it's Eileen, just a quick question. So you just mentioned that if schools go back full time, needing more desks and all of those things, I guess my thought is to make that decision that schools are going back full time indicates that we don't need to be worried about that virus. So it's putting kids together without all the COVID regulations, correct?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. And what I was implying is that, in order to have maximum spacing in classrooms or to set particular classrooms up as we're going along kind of learning, there may be some areas that we need a few more spaces to separate students apart and that sort of thing. So that's really what we're referring to.
And actually before I ask for other questions, I just wanted to give a reminder to Joe and Megan that you can feel free to drop 8:30 if you'd like, or you're more than welcome to stay on. I don't know if you guys saw my chat on that, but I just wanted to let you know. Other questions for Julie in regards to her report?
This is George.
Hi, George.
So Julie, thank you very much for the report, and more importantly, thank you very much for both you and Jen for staying on top of this. I mean, this is not trivial. I mean, managing a budget is never trivial, and you putting this on top of everything else, unexpected expenses. I mean, it's a lot of work, and thank you very much. I guess my question is, we front loaded a lot of capital expenses and repairs and so on last year, pre-COVID. And so hopefully we're a little ahead of what we need to do. This is certainly lasting longer than I anticipated. And so it probably will still last longer. And so are we going to be able to keep up with everything else that we had planned or you had planned for general maintenance and also capital? Or are we pretty soon so far behind, not just timing wise, but also money wise?
So I think I heard most of what you were saying, George.
All right.
And no, it's just hard for, I think, people going out of the conversation, so it made it hard to hear. Yes, we did front load and we did purchase some of the things, and those funds are being sort of frozen at the moment, sort of held. Again, in anticipation of what might be coming, we really are just trying to play it as conservatively as possible right now. And so as we get further along each month that passes, we'll be talking about all of those areas and those, projects and things coming forward that we may or may not do. And to give an example, last year we had 2 really large boiler repairs that we didn't plan for. So we never know what's coming down the pike that's going to affect us either. So, so we hold those kind of close to our, our vest for now. And then as time gets further along in the budget, we know what's happening with the winter and all of those kinds of things that could face us with unanticipated expenses, and we'll have, we'll be better able to answer the questions about projects and that sort of thing down the road, which we always hold till the spring anyway, for the most part. We don't spend that money up front.
I think that boiler is probably a perfect example, right? When we talk about replacing that boiler, at some point that boiler's going to go, right? Because at some point we're going to keep putting money into it and just time to get a new one. I mean, granted, it's not going to be cheap. It's going to be several hundreds of thousands of dollars. But if that just keep pushing down, then the next repair will be another $20,000. I think what it was last time, right? So it's just fair enough.
Yep, absolutely, George. And that's why we hope that when we have to do those projects, we have the money in the capital non-recurring account for those kinds of things as well.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Other questions for Julie or Jan about the report?
Just good for them for getting all the, proper equipment long before everybody was scrambling. Because people are scrambling and a lot of the equipment is back ordered.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
That was really the point of forming our team so early for reopening, to get our heads out of the close down component and back into the what happens when we reopen. And that allowed us to think about all these things that we would need. I also have to say that being involved in the emergency management calls had us thinking about these things earlier. So those two fortunate mindsets, I guess is the way I'd describe it, really allowed us to move forward more quickly.
Are those calls still going on, Jan?
Yes. Yep. They're down to once a week on Wednesday evenings. And after the emergency management call, we all participate in the governor's municipal leaders call, which is also helpful.
Excellent. All right, good. That's good to hear. Other questions for Jan or for Julie? Great. Well, thank you both very much for that. And this is a really helpful report. The format was great, Julie. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. We'll have, obviously updated encumbrances and things like that as we move forward and hopefully get our staff in place. We're still hiring.
Right. Yeah. And I know that usually October is when we start to see actual kind of numbers, when things start to turn as we get more into the year, kind of to George's point, to see whether we're ahead or behind or, where we're falling. I know I'm anxious to know that information too.
Julie, just a question. I know that different districts have been grappling with this. How are we doing with substitutes?
Well, Jan, you can certainly answer that too. We've needed some, I know some long-term substitute positions that we filled. And I know because I grabbed a couple of substitutes to help me with bus monitoring, that there are subs out there that are willing to help out. I don't know that we've needed a whole lot, and you might have more information than that.
Yeah, we haven't needed that many substitutes, but Eileen, we do not have that deep a bench.
I know, yeah, true.
I was listening to one of our school districts in the state closed down today, mostly because they didn't have enough staff. And someone interviewed somebody from Kelly Services who said this shortage is going on 10 years now. So post the 2008-2009 recovery, when people started to find gainful employment, the substitute ranks started to dwindle, and that has continued. So we weren't in a good place anyway, so it's a bit fragile, quite honestly.
Great. Thanks so much.
And we increased our daily rates twice over the last few years.
What's the sub rate now in Old Saybrook?
Julie, we had 90.
It's $90 a day.
But in case somebody's looking for some work.
If you notice the sign up front of the school says, "We're hiring."
Great. Any other questions before we move on? Well, thank you both again. So we're moving on to our last topic, which is a large one. It's the policy reading, and I'll hand it over to Eileen and Jan. And I know that there are some policies that the policy committee did not get to yesterday. So do you want to walk us through which ones we're tabling so that we can strike them from our
Sure.
agenda?
So let me just start off. Good evening, everybody. I don't want you to get nervous by looking at that long list because it is a long list. But the policy committee met last evening for about an hour and a half. And a majority of these policies, there are 20 that really related to COVID-19 that we're bringing forth this evening. So in terms of what Tara just asked, if you start at the bottom of the list, or right here where it starts with prohibition of sex discrimination and harassment, that's tabled. Code of Ethics 4000 series is tabled. Series 5000 student dress tabled. And Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 tabled. And that's going to be, and also high school graduation requirements will be addressed at another policy committee meeting. So during this, during the time frame that Old Saybrook Public Schools are responding to emergencies created by COVID-19, it's a bylaw, but policies can be adopted after one reading, as opposed to talking about them, bringing them back. And that's for the urgency for the superintendent to be able to implement these as soon as possible. And the policies for this evening, there are about 20 of them, and they're actually specific to this category. And the policies that maybe Jan will be highlighting, or if you have questions about or really sharing, will be in effect up to and including June 30th, 2021, unless the board shortens or extends the term of the COVID-19 policies or their sunsetting. So we wanted to make this as easy as possible. Last night, Jan did a tremendous job of going through each and every one. So what we asked Trent to do, and Jan, and they did that this morning, was to do a summary, which you would find in your board notebook as best as possible, to give a little bit of an overview of the policies that we're looking at tonight for first reading and adoption. And I'll turn it over to Jan, but if anybody has questions, and specifically we can address them, a certain policy. Or Greg.
This is George.
Hi, George.
I mean, just a general procedural question, or I guess try to understand the environment of the policy situation. Again, I appreciate what you were saying, Eileen. It's a long list and it's hefty, and most of it deals with the current situation. I was just curious about this memorandum that was sent by Shipman Goodwin on July 15th, and it's to model policy subscribers. And so I think this was attached to an email that was given to us. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you guys have access to it, but I'm going to see if I can enlarge this a little bit. But essentially, I'm looking at sort of the second paragraph. If people have found that, it says, we have developed the following COVID-19 temporary policy package. Mm-hmm. And so essentially the second sentence starts with, the packet is structured such that the board can adopt the entire packet by appropriate review and vote. And so,
right.
Boy, that sounds really attractive to me.
Yeah, and that's not how our and Jan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is not how our agenda is set up this evening.
No, I understand. Yeah. I guess the only catch was, if we had within each one sort of tailored to ourselves, then we would have to basically, then just adopting theirs wouldn't quite do it, because we have essentially changed the one that we're supposed to replace and temporarily replace. So that would sort of make it complicated. But anyway, I just throw out there.
The only way you take those and put it on a consent agenda.
Yeah, and that's not how we set up our agenda tonight. And I think because, to your point exactly, George, I think that we made tweaks to the policies. I mean, I think there was a couple of them, and it was covered in the crosswalk, that we are adopting, in whole. But there are some that we really are amending kind of our existing policies, which is why we are going to have to go through a motion, I think, for each and every one of these this evening and, approve it, unfortunately. Or fortunately. Maybe we'll enjoy that. It'll be fun.
I do think some engender conversation, and others that just say adopt Shipman and Goodwin's language probably aren't so important to be discussing at any length, to your point, George.
So this is Karina. I just have a little bit of a question about our process. So is it that, because I was trying to wade through to best prepare for this evening, and is the approach that you'll take us through the summary document, or what is our process for this evening so that we can do it in a way that is most efficient, both in going through content and in use of time?
Good question.
So what I was thinking, and this is why we had the crosswalk and the Shipman and Goodwin summary sent out to you today, is that those items that we're adopting as Shipman and Goodwin language without any amendments, or I can point out a minor amendment, that those could just be voted on, assuming that everyone read, and if anyone had a question, we could stop and answer that question. Those things where we've amended language, and by the way, we have not amended a lot of language. We've just sometimes tweaked a few things. We stop and point those things out. And in those places, even those places where we've adopted Shipman and Goodwin's optional language, we've only adopted their optional language because we already adopted it in our current policy. So we're just making sure that the new policy matches old policy. And in some of them, this is a long answer, Karina, so I am getting to a point. In some of them, the change is simply that they're saying this is a temporary policy, replacing whatever you had for now, like the redefining of what online courses are. So while I think we have to take them one by one, I think I can cue you and say, unless anybody has a big question, this one's just a straightforward change for COVID. If that's comfortable for the board.
Yeah.
My answer was longer than it needed to be.
That's okay. So do you want to take it one by one, Jan, and we'll go through motions one by one, and that way we can answer questions, as we get to them.
That would be great. So
great.
The first policy is policy concerning temporary policies and regulations related to COVID-19. So this policy, I see George laughing. This policy has no crosswalk. It's a new policy. It's just saying, hey, these policies are temporary. All the policies that you see on the website with a yellow highlight are temporary. And the good news is you've been through this activity already, everybody. Remember back in April, we created our own temporary policies. Now some of those will be replaced by these new ones. And here is one explaining the process. That's it. I'm recommending we adopt it, Shipman and Goodwin language.
All right, so with the first policy listed, the policy concerning temporary policies, regulations related to COVID-19 pandemic, can we please get a motion to accept this new policy?
So moved, Alan.
Moved by Alan. Second, please.
Karen, second.
Seconded by Karen. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Yep.
Any abstentions? All right, so that looked like that was unanimous.
Yep, and the legal references is basically coming from the state for their adapt, advance, achieve, and Connecticut's plan, which is 220.
So the next one, policy concerning health and safety protocols related to COVID-19 pandemic is a new policy. I'm recommending that we adopt Shipman and Goodwin's language as presented. Obviously, it says in it that this policy is subject to change because we have to constantly be flexing. And if I were going to give you a theme for all of these policies, the language is softer, less rigid than policy language typically is, because Shipman and Goodwin recognizes we're constantly changing and responding. Our plan, you notice the Adapt, Advance, Achieve, Connecticut's Plan to Learn and Grow. We'll use our plan as the regulation for many of these so that people can allude to how we are addressing health and safety.
All right. Any questions in regards to this policy?
I think what's just important to know is that with this policy that, again, failure to comply with health and safety protocols might lead to disciplinary actions for students and staff. So that may be an umbrella to masks, it may be an umbrella to a lot of aspects that the district is putting together for safety.
Thank you, Eileen. Any questions or comments? All right, then I'd look for a motion to approve policy concerning health and safety protocols related to the COVID-19 pandemic.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second, Karen.
Second by Karen. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. The next one, Series 4000, Families First Coronavirus Response Act Leave.
This policy just codifies for our own local policy, federal law, which is in place right now through December 31st of the current year. So if the federal law changes or ceases to exist, then this would either be sunsetted or amended. And it basically takes the different forms of leave available for staff under federal law, and that means EPSALA, and what everyone's calling FMLA plus, the coronavirus FMLA, and it codifies it, and it talks about what is needed to apply for it. And we've been doing this already and working with Shipman and Goodwin on processing these types of claims in district.
Any questions or comments in regards to this policy? All right, then can I have a motion to approve the Families First Coronavirus Response Act Leave Series 4000 policy?
So moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
Alan, second?
Second by Alan. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved.
I just know it's a
moving on.
temporary policy, so a lot of these policies we're putting in place now, but they may be retroactive. We may need to decide after this whole pandemic that that's not something we need to have anymore.
Okay, thank you, Eileen.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on to COVID series, use of face coverings in school.
This is a brand new policy, obviously, and I'm recommending that we adopt Shipman and Goodwin's language. It includes optional language that they had put in saying we did or didn't have to adopt it, and it's particularly about people wearing face masks at school-sponsored activities, and I'm saying we leave that in. That's in keeping with our plan, and that's in keeping with our philosophy about safety first. But other than that, then there are regulations to go along with it. Again, I would ask that we include the optional language, and that's it.
This one also gives us a policy about what's appropriate and should not include things like bandanas or exhalation valve masks and neck gaiters. So it has some highlighted things in there of what's not acceptable.
Questions or comments about this policy? All right, then I'd like a motion to approve COVID series use of face coverings in school.
So moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
I can second.
Second by Cindy. Thank you. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved.
The highlight that was removed from that policy was that when we had the policy committee meeting, Jan Habdina recommended that we don't necessarily need to consult with local health department to determine whether more than 12 feet is required when indoors without masks.
To clarify, only because we already know their position, we were following it, and it's built into our plan.
Also, in that policy talks a little bit about about medical exemptions. So it's hefty, you know, and so we look at that. It's in the policy, but then within the regulation itself, there's a medical health exemption form. for parents to fill out, based on certain criteria and health-related issues for staff or children. Trying to give you a little bit more personalization of some of these policies and what they are saying.
Thank you, Eileen.
You're welcome.
Karina, are you asking a question?
I am, and I realize I had unmuted myself, but not fully.
All good.
Eileen, my question for you is that summary that you just gave for the
Previous policy? Yeah.
Voted on? So
Yeah.
that would be helpful, I think, in advance. I think that's happened twice. So, because I think by Robert's rules, after the vote, we can't really discuss it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think it's helpful.
I see.
And I appreciate your personalization. I think
Gotcha.
it's more appropriate in advance of the vote.
Sure.
Thank
No
you.
worries. Thanks.
Good reminder. Thank you, Karina. So moving on to Series 1000 green cleaning programs.
So the board has always had, since 2017, we had the same green cleaning, and before that, I'm sure, green cleaning policy. This just replaces that policy. These are temporary revisions that include disinfectants and sanitizers that were not originally considered part of the green cleaning program and are in use right now. Part of the requirement, once this policy is adopted, is that Mrs. Pendleton will have to put out a list of the chemicals being used. That has to be shared with staff, and it has to be provided with parents to parents upon request. And obviously, I mean, this makes sense. This is about keeping people safe and making sure we're killing the germs on surfaces. So that's what that's about. And I'm recommending that we adopt Shipman and Goodwin's policy and temporarily replace our January 3rd, 2017 policy.
Yeah, but just know that this was adopted in 2016. So we're taking a look now at 2020 with these additions, temporary amendments.
Questions or comments in regards to this? All right, then I look for a motion to approve this Series 1000 green cleaning programs.
So moved, Ellen?
Moved by Ellen. Do we have a second?
Second, Karen.
Second by Karen. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. Moving on to Series 1000 use of school facilities.
Again, we have a policy that this will temporarily replace. It looks very much like the policy we have here. I have amended it to match our practices. So the original one said that if you want to use a building, you send your application to this person and that person. Some of them are titles we don't have or don't use. And so you'll see Director of Operations, Facility and Finance. That's from our current policy. Again, that's just amended as far as staffing goes to match us. The highlighted in yellow are the new additional health and safety protocols, and it gives a lot more language about flexibility. Like the superintendent or her designee can say at any time, "We're not doing this." And really, at this point, we're doing a lot of "we're not doing this" because we really don't want to invite people into our buildings, causing lots of additional cleaning and additional burden on our staff, and also being concerned about exposure. They sent along forms to use. But in fact, we already have a complete manual on using our facilities and fields. And so we'll continue to use our forms. Really, the policy just gives us the ability to gatekeep.
Do you have comments on this one, Eileen, or any additional color?
I've been saying that superintendent may limit or restrict the use of the school facilities by communities and other groups.
Any questions or comments? All right, so could we have a motion to approve Series 1000 use of school facilities?
So moved.
Moved by Eileen, second.
Second.
Second by Karen. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. Moving on to Series 1000 visitors and observations in schools.
Again, I'm recommending that we adopt Shipman and Goodwin's language, keeping the optional language about visitors and observers permitted in school buildings or grounds must comply with all school health and safety protocols according to Adapt, Advance, Achieve, all of that you have highlighted in yellow. And the regulations that go with this policy are already in use. There are just a slight adaptation to the COVID situation at the end of that regulation, number 10, and then the legal references.
Yes. So all visitors and observers permitted inside school buildings or on school grounds must comply with this school health and safety protocols in place at the time, which we already visited in one of the other policies before.
Any questions or comments? Can we get a motion to approve Series 1000 visitors and observations in school?
Just a quick question, but again, same thing like
Sure, go ahead, George.
one, it's instead of school facility use, right now the visitors are essentially zero, right?
Right, that's correct.
Yeah, essentially, exactly. Any other questions or comments? Can we get a motion to approve Series 1000 visitors and observations in schools?
So moved.
Moved by Eileen, second.
Second.
Second by Cindy. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. Next up, Series 1000 school volunteers, student interns, and other non-employees.
Again, recommend that we use Shipman and Goodwin's temporary to sunset on June 30th or before if the board wants to. Keeping all of the language that's highlighted, it really is just about that anybody who's coming in, interns, student teachers have to follow our safety protocols. And that is true in the regulation too. The regulation is something we already have in use, and it just adds the COVID language.
And last night at the policy committee meeting, Jan clarified, there's a statement in there that basically says no employee, the Old Saybrook Public Schools shall serve as a volunteer in any capacity except may be approved by the superintendent or his or her designee based on specific situation. And Jan helped to clarify that that would be a labor issue.
Any questions or comments?
Again, this was adopted in 2014. So now we have some changes 6 years later.
Can we get a motion to approve Series 1000 school volunteers, student interns, and other non-employees?
So moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
Second by Alan?
Second by Alan. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. Next up, Series 4000 employment and student teacher checks.
Again, we have this policy. This will replace it. The Shipman and Goodwin policy with notes regarding optional language from me. I'm just recommending that we keep the optional language, which you probably is transparent to you because Trent would have included it in your version. But it basically just says that we also ask to get background checks from outside of our state as well if our candidates come from outside of the state. That is something that we're not required to do, but we choose to do it. And really the gist of this policy is that fingerprinting has been struggling for the last year and a half anyway. The state has been having some difficulties in this arena, and they actually were on the verge of sending their fingerprinting process out to a private vendor and then pulled the plug on it, and that has not moved forward. But local fingerprinting processes and state fingerprinting processes don't seem to be talking to each other. So one of our staff members who does this, this is one of her tasks, is staying on top of it. But as you might imagine, there's been a backlog of fingerprints for employment because they were closed down for a period of time. And now this policy anticipates if fingerprinting is closed down in the future, that we would still be able to hire people temporarily while waiting for them to get fingerprinted. We have someone here who spends a lot of time on this. It's a struggle.
And is needed, as we were saying, once they get fingerprinted, if something didn't seem to be on target, then we'd be able to release them.
Yes, because fortunately our employees are asked to answer the question, have you ever arrested for a felony? Do you appear on the DCF abuse and neglect list? And if they answer those no, and that turns out not to be accurate, that's not going to have them here for very long.
Any other questions or comments in regards to employment and student teacher checks? All right, then can we get a motion to approve Series 4000 employment and student teacher checks?
So moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Cindy. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. Moving on to Series 4000 employee use of district computer systems and electronic communication.
So as so often happens, again, this policy currently exists in the list of policies from the Ontario Board of Education policy book, but as so often happens, there are companion policies here. There is a staff policy, and then later on there'll be a student policy that covers basically the same issue. It's recognizing that our employee use of computer systems really was meant for a brick and mortar setting, and we have folks who are now doing this work from home. And so anything they do on our computers, on our network, they're being reminded that there's no expectation of privacy, that they're expected to use it properly. And most of this policy is just repetition of what we currently have, other than describing other situations besides being in the building and using our computers. And then the regulations are almost no changes from our current regulation, other than talking about using the computers off of school grounds and using our network off of school grounds. Amity Goss is the person who gets the complaints of problems or misuse. That you're welcome. And that's true now and would continue to be.
And this is especially essential because of the remote and distance learning that needs to have access to technology.
Any questions or comments in regards to this policy? Then can I please get a motion to approve Series 4000 employee use of the district's computer systems and electronic communications?
So moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
Karen?
Seconded by Karen. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? So moved. As we said before, we're tabling Series 4000 high school graduation requirements, and we're going to move on to Series 5000 student attendance truancy and chronic absenteeism.
So as you know, we are required to be responsible for the attendance of our students, to know where they are, and if they're not attending, to find out why they're not attending. That's always been true. And obviously that's been made more complicated during this period of time where people are temporarily keeping their children home, withdrawing them to homeschool them in hybrid settings. So this is just language that considers that's our current situation. I'm recommending that we adopt it in total, keeping the optional language. And it just basically says that we are responsible for knowing where our students are. And if they are participating from home, they need to be participating. These are my words, but the idea is 50% of the school day, in accordance with the state definition of what does it mean to be in attendance at school. And of course, the tricky part here is describing what at school is, because at school can be from home. And so it also advises us about health matters, keeping track of health matters. You know, I don't think a lot of people are aware that we were always keeping track of numbers like influenza, and who was out and who was sick. And we have to continue to do that. And now, of course, add COVID to that. And as I said earlier, we're required to report attendance and participation on a weekly basis to the state of Connecticut right now.
And this one is just very specific, especially to COVID. You know, on page 5, that any absence due to a student illness and a sign note has to include specific symptoms exhibited by the student and for trends for the district, and then they need to get a signed notice from a physician.
The regulation that goes along with is, other than adding the temporary COVID language, exactly like what we are using now.
Any questions or comments about this policy?
I don't have the policy open in front of me, and I can't recall if it says this, but this is relevant to what Eileen just read. So there has to be a signed note from a parent that the student is absent. So in a hybrid model, when a student is if they're a cohort 1 and they're home on Thursday and they're out, a parent will not be sending an assigned note. So do we need to amend it to allow for an email from a parent, or how? Right, we can't live to the letter of that if that's the stringent requirement of the policy. Did I explain that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
You did. We accept emails from parents, and we also accept phone calls when a combination of emails
Right.
and phone calls. Yes. So
Yeah.
I don't think this policy says that it has to be
A signed note.
No, I don't think it does.
Good. Okay, good. I that's what I heard. Thought I heard. So good. That's good. That's great.
Signed note. Yep.
Good question, Karina. Other questions or comments?
This is George.
Go ahead, George.
This one I actually had a question on. I mean, and actually the question from Goodwin, and that is, do we actually have any linking between graduation requirements and attendance, or graduation credits and attendance? I didn't think we do. Is that true?
We do not.
Very good. Thanks.
Question. Other questions or comments on this policy? At this point, can we get a motion to approve Series 5000 student attendance truancy and chronic absenteeism?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I can second. Cindy?
Second by Cindy, thank you. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so moved.
Tara, I apologize. I missed who made the initial motion for that one.
So that was Karen and Cindy.
Thank you.
You got it. Moving on to Series 5000 health assessments, screenings, and oral health assessments.
Again, this is about softening some language because we do require health assessments. We've pushed the date out to November from our usual much earlier date. And that is because both this policy and we recognize that students have been unable to get in to see doctors. And so it says that we can keep students out of school, but that given the current situation, that we need to be mindful of the fact that they may have trouble getting appointments. We are, however, required to make sure that students are healthy. And so we are able to send them for screenings, and we have set a deadline for that. Otherwise, this policy is exactly the same. It says we have assessments, you have to follow these assessments, you have to be healthy to come to school, and we need to know that you're healthy.
Any questions or comments on this policy? Can I get a motion to approve Series 5000 health assessment screenings and oral health assessments?
So moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
Second.
Dan?
Looks like second by Karen. I got you first there, Karen. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. Moving on to Series 5000 student discipline.
This is a huge policy and it looks intimidating, but in fact, there are really two changes. One is that if we find ourselves in an expulsion setting, that expulsion can be done virtually. The hearing can be done virtually. The other one is that students can be disciplined for not following the health and safety protocols of the school district. Those are really the two big changes here. Otherwise, this is our discipline policy. It has always been that long and that descriptive.
It's just something new. They put, I think it's on page 3. For purposes of this policy, references to school and classroom shall include physical educational environments as well as virtual educational environments, whether synchronous or asynchronous, which talks about the internet platform and remote learning. So that's an addition that specific to the COVID-19 pandemic.
And then there were just 2 minor changes in legislation on page 6. The definition for number 15 and number 17 on possession of paraphernalia, possession, sale, distribution, slight changes to include the electronic nicotine delivery system and to make room for that as a reality in our lives.
Any questions or comments on this policy?
And just know that it addresses wearing a mask and social distancing or physical distancing. That's part of the umbrella of discipline.
Any other questions or comments? Can we get a motion to approve Series 5000 student discipline?
So moved. Alan?
Moved by Alan. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Eileen. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. Moving on to Series 5000 transportation.
All right, so there is COVID language obviously included here. That we, particularly Roman numeral 3, the language used to read that we could, if we wanted to tell parents that they had to drive kids to school, we would have to reimburse them because they wouldn't be using our transportation they're entitled to. So I was saying last night at the policy meeting, I could see this happening in a large rural district where you're pulling students out from far away. And you might say, if you could drive your children in, that actually would cost us less and we're willing to pay you for it. Not something we've ever exercised here that I know of. Change that language to parents during the pandemic can volunteer to transport their children to school. And as I said earlier, we have the survey where we are asking parents, are you planning to use our buses? They can volunteer to not use our buses. They've been volunteering to not use our buses for years. If you've ever been on the middle school on Field Street. But this allows us to suggest, if you'd like to volunteer to bring your children in, that's great. The only other thing I want to point out to you is Roman numeral 7. I'm toggling between 2 versions of the policy. There's a new law about complaints about bus drivers and busing. I'm sorry, not bus drivers, busing, I believe. Oops, here we go.
Under the complaint procedure.
Would you say, Eileen? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Eileen? Did I cut you off?
I was just asking you, it's number 7. Is it Roman numeral 7?
It's Roman numeral 7, and it's, I believe, items 3 and 4. But as I said, I'm trying to toggle between 2 different versions of it, and I can't find my other version of it. But it basically talks about a complaint process and that the complaint process has to be brought forward to the commissioner by the superintendent or her designee. That's new language, and that has nothing to do with COVID. That's a change in language.
So said Big Ben. Any questions or comments about this policy? And do we lose you, Karina? I don't see you on video, so might have lost her. If there's oh, there you go. Okay, thanks. So if there's no other questions, can we get a motion to approve Series 5000 transportation?
So moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
Alan, second?
Second by Alan. All in favor, aye, or raise of hand. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. Moving on to Series 5000, student use of districts, computer systems, internet safety.
Here's our matching policy.
Mm-hmm.
This one, it matches our personnel policy. And so this basically tells students that you need to use our computers and our network properly. If you don't, there are repercussions. It gets into very specific details. Most of that language exists in our current policy, but it also considers the fact that a lot of this work can be done from outside of our schools.
Any questions or comments about this one?
No, I think at the policy meeting, which the board might find interesting, I think it was Alan maybe who brought it up, just about student use of computers and taking a look at information that students may be using for a course that their brothers and sisters may have access to just by being in the space of their home, and how that might be addressed. Because there's a lot in here about harmful to minors.
Jan, did you talk about a potential addressing of that with
Today? No, I didn't.
No. I mean, last night you mentioned that you might address that in some way, shape, or form going forward.
Actually, I thought that that was something that could be shared with teachers, parents, and students, older students. I thought that we could enlist everyone's support and help on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, can we get a motion to approve Series 5000 student use of the district's computer systems and internet safety?
Moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Cindy. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. Moving on to use of private technology and device students.
So this again exists, but it's interesting because Mrs. Goss and I had an interesting meeting with Mr. Gardner, our IT person, about students using their own devices or another family member's device, and expectation of privacy, and how much we are protecting students from when they're working on Old Saybrook Public Schools networks, that they are protected completely. And so this language talks about the terms and rules under which students are allowed to use private technology. And it recognizes that we are preferring we are encouraging strongly that they use only the computers that we issue to them. So this policy is very helpful to us in explaining that. And it talks about technology that has been issued by the board, and the fact that we prefer that they use that, whether that's desktops or laptops. On the next page, it talks about top of the page, privately owned technological devices may not be used during instructional time except as specifically permitted by instructional staff, or because there may be a need at some point, or unless necessary for a student to access the district's digital learning platform or otherwise engage in remote learning during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I added, because this is the way we want it to be viewed in our district, only because they're temporarily unable to access their district issued computer. We prefer that unless they can't use that computer, that they use the computer that we've given them. Lots of extra protection for these kids that way. Everything else is fairly typical, except wherever it talks about board property in possession at a school-sponsored activity, which is a way of saying distance learning. That's embedded throughout. And that really is it. Everything else is pretty much the same. A couple of words here and there. They corrected a couple of their own misspellings.
Any questions or comments about this one? Then can we get a motion to approve Series 5000 use of private technology devices by students?
So moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Cindy. Thank you, Cindy. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. We're in the home stretch, guys. Series 6,000 credit for online courses.
Hang in there, everybody.
We're gonna do it.
Yeah, so you did an amendment to the credit for online courses back in April. So because our language said, if you want to take an online course, that's great, but somebody else is going to have to pay for it. Well, obviously we were moving all of our courses to online courses, and so we had to change that language. So now we will replace that policy that we temporarily put in place with Shipman and Goodwin's policy. This is not a temporary policy. This is a 2021 update. And it talks about students earning high school graduation credit by participating has successfully. Interesting that they're not calling this temporary because they mentioned COVID during the COVID-19 health emergency or other long-term school closure related to a community-wide emergency. So they're anticipating keeping this policy, and it allows us to offer distance learning for lots of different reasons. It's nice and clean. It's probably cleaner because they went to law school and I didn't. It's probably cleaner than the policy that we wrote in the spring, and this one can replace that, I think, very effectively. Although we did capture the sentiment of this one.
This was actually adopted in 2012. It's now 2020. It also talked about expenses if you're going to take a class. Distance learning provided to students during the COVID-19 or other community-wide emergency shall be provided at board expense.
Any questions or comments about this policy? Can we get a motion to approve Series 6,000 credit for online courses? Who got that one first? I'll give it to Eileen. Okay. And do we have a second? You can unmute the fastest. It looks like Jan Furman seconded that. Thank you. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. Series 9,000 meeting conduct.
So again, you did one of these in April of 20, and this is just the Shipman and Goodwin's latest version. It basically recognizes what you have all been talking about, which is how does one hold a meeting in public at a time when we're not allowed to gather in groups? So while it might be fine if 5 people decide to show up at a board meeting, if 100 people decide to show up at a board meeting, we probably can't, I can't remember what the number is right now, but if the executive order says that, we can't choose people to come in and select people to go home because that's no longer a fair meeting. And we can't have the meeting at that point. So this policy helps to codify how to keep your meetings moving forward, keeping them legal and appropriate. And it says that you just have to do what the exercise that Tara has been going through with the board's attorney, which is identify how the board is going to meet, how they will allow for public comment, if they will allow for public comment, because you're not required to, but this board always has wanted to. So if we're going to continue to do that, how to do that safely. Roman numeral, number 3B, 3C, or just section C rather. It talks about board members may participate by electronic equipment, again, recognizing that some board members may not be comfortable participating in person. And then the last item on the next page, page 3, letter B, notwithstanding any provisions to the contrary set forth in section 4A above or in any other bylaws, the board may modify the procedures for or eliminate public address if board meetings are conducted remotely. Again, giving you the leeway to make meetings possible, to not stop all board business out of concern about not being available to the public. But I know you're grappling with that now and coming up with some answers.
And then for some, then it also addresses, interestingly, like smoking or something in there. But wherever board meetings held, you can't be smoking. But I think when we had meeting conduct, I think we always gave permission if board members were out of town, they could always be in touch, by phone. This just added the COVID-19 component.
Any questions or comments about this policy?
Just a comment. I think last night we spoke about procedures or guidelines for the public that will be published at some point of how they can submit, right? So there'll be more on that. Tara, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I will make sure that it's clear on our agendas going forward, how the public send us questions and comments, and we'll publish that on our website. I mean, we already have a link in our website, and that, has been available to the public all along, but we'll make sure that we point it out and make it clear, because we certainly don't want to hamper people from giving us feedback. Other questions or comments? Then can we get a motion to approve Series 9000 meeting conduct?
So moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second? It looks like Jan Furman. Thank you. Seconded that. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved.
The last one.
The last one, guys. We're getting down there. Series 9000 formulation, adoption, amendment, or deletion of policies.
Yep.
This one's easy. All we're doing is taking the April 20 that you did and making it the COVID, the shipment and Goodwin, adding the shipment and Goodwin COVID language. So this is temporary. This change is temporary during the emergency situation. That's it.
Any questions or comments on that? All right, then can we get a motion to approve Series 9000 formulation, adoption, amendment, or deletion of policies?
So moved.
Moved by Eileen. Can we get a second?
Second.
And second by Cindy. Thank you, Cindy. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. And as we mentioned before, we tabled the rest of these, and we'll be bringing those back for a future board meeting, which maybe we can try to break up into consent agendas.
I just want to say that in all my years of doing policy, we've never brought 20 to a board meeting ever. But because,
yeah, that's a record, Eileen.
No, this is
well facilitated, Tara and Jan,
Eileen.
and summarized Eileen.
Yeah.
No, it's just not the way that I think sometimes policy needs to go through, but there were so many. And if people would prefer at any time to get a binder that's available, because sometimes it's hard to read online. So always feel free. And I hope we gave Jan, did majority of this work here, a synopsis of what we're trying to look at, that we're giving her the opportunity to approve these after a first reading so they can go in the book. And there we go. Thanks for your indulgence, because this is a lot.
It was a lot. Thank you. Thanks for all your hard work, everybody.
Thank you.
So just moving on, we've got a special meeting.
Sure. I do have a comment. I just want to add my thanks to both Eileen and Jan. It is a lot of policy that came up once, but it was incredibly necessary because essentially it codifies everything that we're trying to do with policy. And so if someone comes in and they don't wear a mask, it's policy. If someone comes in and no visitors, it's a policy. And it's important work, absolutely. So it's well worth the time. I thank you both for this. Otherwise, it's just some rule that the superintendent decided on. Like this one now is policy. It's important. Absolutely. And I was going through this, and I was just thinking, there's one for me anyway that particularly stood out, and that really is the use of school-issued computers. And basically, every student is now issued a school computer, which we have done at a cost. And presumably then this is duplicated across the entire state. For some districts, that could be an enormous cost that they have to absorb somehow or other, which is not trivial, but it's now required. And I'm not sure people plan for that, but all the other ones, it's manageable. This one almost feels like one of those unfunded mandates, right? So it's very expensive. Very expensive. Wow.
I think that's exactly what it is, George. Yeah, it's a really good point. And
follow-up, maintenance, upkeep, people, and so on. I mean, there's initial outlay of the actual hardware, but the subsequent continuation of keeping that up, that is huge expense. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good comment. We're very fortunate, that's for sure. And certainly equipment doesn't run itself, as we all know at home. Thank God for technology. So thank you all for working through that with all of us, and again to the policy committee for going through that and for setting this up in such a way that we all could understand it.
To the best of your ability.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard stuff.
All right.
So reminders, we've got a special meeting that will be in regards to our strategic planning on October 6th. And our next regularly scheduled meeting will be October 13th. October, people. And with that, I'd like a motion to adjourn.
So Tara.
Oh, yes.
Just a quick question or comment. And so I think, I forget where I read this, but I guess maybe one of the earlier emails, you mentioned something about the first two meetings in October are going to be online.
Correct.
But then there's a possibility that our self-evaluation, leadership evaluation might be in person.
Yes.
And so, but that's like October 27th or something, which is another lifetime away from now. But essentially by tonight, because we have approved the mask wearing policy, by definition, we'll be coming to that meeting. If we do it in person, we'll be coming with masks.
That is correct. And so, and we haven't, I'll say this, like you just said, George, that meeting is a long time away from now and a lot can happen. Obviously as a board, our priority is to make sure our students are able to stay in school and stay healthy. And although I know as a board, we'd like to, meet together, that has to be our first thought. And so, I think we'll obviously have to see how October goes, both in our town and in our district, before we can make a final call on that. But, as we get closer to that meeting, because it is a meeting that happens essentially in executive session, where we can and do control the number of people that attend that meeting, that is a meeting that the board will have an opportunity, hopefully, to choose to attend in person or not. And we'll make sure that we make online available for those of you who don't feel comfortable. And at this point, I have to say that this is tentative plans because, like you said, George, it's a long time from now. But you are right. We'll have to comply with our own policies. Masks will need to be worn. We'll have to be able to social distance. For Karen and I, we'll get to have the door open and finally be cold for a change instead of hot fan. Sorry. That boardroom's going to be the right temperature for a change. Jan's already cold just thinking about it. But that'll be kind of our first opportunity to try that, concept out. But I'm more than happy to hear you guys' feedback. Please reach out to me with questions or comments or concerns about that. And whether we meet in person or whether we meet virtually, the subject of how we meet and how we can do better, will be on the agenda for that meeting.
Yeah.
But thank you. Good question. So with that, if there's no other questions about our reminders or our future meetings, can we get a motion to adjourn? Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Alan. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. All right. Thank you all very much for your participation and work. Thank you, Jan and Trent and Amity and Julie as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Stay healthy, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks. You well.
Good night, everyone.